Captain James Mitchell pressed his face against the observation deck's thick glass, staring at the invisible wall that had trapped humanity for half a century. The energy barrier stretched across space like a cosmic prison, shimmering occasionally when meteors struck it and disintegrated into nothing. Earth sat alone in its solar system, cut off from a vast galaxy beyond. Still gives you the chills, doesn't it? Lieutenant Tom Harrison joined him at the window, coffee steaming in his hands. Both men served aboard the orbital defense station that monitored the barrier, watching for any signs of change that never came. James nodded slowly. My grandfather was alive when they built this thing. Said you could see the flash from Earth when they activated it, like watching your own coffin lid slam shut. The story was burned into every human child's memory. In 2157, massive alien ships had appeared across Earth's skies. Not invaders, but evaluators from something called the Galactic Coalition. For 6 months, they studied humanity with scientific precision. They watched wars, analyzed governments, measured technological progress, and documented every aspect of human civilization. Their final report was devastating. Humanity scored high in creativity, adaptability, and technological innovation, but they failed catastrophically in the areas that mattered most to galactic society. Too aggressive, too emotional, too willing to fight over resources, beliefs, and territory. The Coalition xenobiologists concluded that humans were a cosmic hazard that would destabilize peaceful galactic civilization. The vote wasn't even close. 437 species voted to quarantine Earth. Only 12 abstained. None voted against it. Tom sipped his coffee and shook his head. What gets me is how they just wrote us off, like we were some kind of disease that needed containing. The barrier itself was a masterpiece of alien engineering. It allowed sunlight and cosmic radiation through, but stopped anything larger than an atom from crossing. No ships in, no ships out. Earth could develop all it wanted within its solar system, but it would do so alone. Meanwhile, thousands of light years away in the Andromeda sector, a very different crisis was unfolding. The planet Kethros Prime orbited a star that should have burned steadily for another billion years. Instead, it flickered and dimmed like a dying light bulb. Ambassador Lyra stood on her world's highest mountain, watching the sunset that might be one of the last her people would ever see. Her species, the Kathrani, had evolved as gentle herbivores on a world of endless meadows and crystal rivers. They had no concept of war, no understanding of violence. When they reached the stars, they became the galaxy's diplomats and peacekeepers, beloved for their wisdom and compassion. But wisdom and compassion meant nothing against the Vexan Empire. The Vexans were everything the Kathrani were not. They consumed worlds for resources, enslaved entire species, and viewed the universe as their rightful property. When they discovered that dying stars could be harvested for exotic matter, they built machines capable of accelerating stellar collapse. Why wait millions of years for a star to die naturally when you could kill it in decades and harvest the energy? Kethros Prime star was their latest victim. Lyra's assistant, a young Kathrani named Vel, approached with data tablets clutched against his chest. The latest readings, Ambassador. The solar output has dropped another 3% this month. She took the tablets, but didn't need to read them. Every Kathrani could feel it in their bones. Their son was dying, murdered by machines that cared nothing for the 2 million innocent lives that depended on its warmth. Have we heard anything from the Coalition Emergency Council? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Vel's large, gentle eyes filled with sadness. They voted yesterday. The official response is that relocating our entire population would require too many resources. They suggest we adapt to underground living or consider voluntary population reduction. The words hit like physical blows. Population reduction. The Coalition was suggesting that the Kathrani simply let millions of their people die rather than inconvenience the greater galactic community. Back on Earth, James Mitchell was ending another shift monitoring humanity's prison when the alarm started screaming. Something was coming through the barrier, not breaking it, but slipping through like water through a net. Whatever was out there was dying, its systems failing, its trajectory purely gravitational. Sir, we got an unidentified vessel on collision course with Earth. Tom called from his station. Looks like it's barely holding together. James grabbed the communications array. This was it. The first contact humanity had experienced in 50 years. Whatever was out there was either desperate enough or die enough to risk the Coalition's wrath by approaching the quarantine system. Neither man could have imagined that this failing ship would carry the key to humanity's redemption, or that it would force them to choose between their own freedom and the survival of strangers who had never spoken in their defense. The ship tumbled through space, its hull cracked in bleeding atmosphere, carrying a desperate ambassador toward the one species the galaxy had deemed too dangerous to trust. The Kathrani scout ship hit Earth's atmosphere like a burning meteor, its hull glowing white-hot as it screamed toward the Pacific Ocean. Lieutenant Tom Harrison watched from the rescue helicopter as the alien craft skipped across the water like a stone before finally sinking beneath the waves in a cloud of steam. "There's no way anyone survived that," his co-pilot muttered, circling the crash site where debris floated among the swells. But Tom had seen something just before impact, a glint of metal, like an escape pod ejecting at the last second. "Take us down to those coordinates," he ordered, pointing to a spot 200 yards from the main wreckage. They found Ambassador Lyra floating unconscious in a crystalline pod that had cracked open on impact. Her alien features were surprisingly delicate, almost human-like, but with skin that shimmered like pearl and large eyes that seemed too wise for her face. Most shocking of all, she was breathing Earth's atmosphere without any protective equipment. The medical team at Peterson Air Force Base worked frantically to keep her alive. Dr. William Hayes had never treated an alien before, but her biology seemed remarkably compatible with human medicine. As she drifted in and out of consciousness, she kept repeating the same words in accented but perfect English. "Must speak. To your leaders, time running out." General Patricia Williams arrived within hours, her expression grim as she studied the reports. This was unprecedented. No alien had set foot on Earth since the quarantine began 50 years ago. The very fact that this being had risked approaching the forbidden system meant something catastrophic was happening out there. When Lyra finally awakened 3 days later, her first words nearly broke the general's heart. Are you the monsters they warned us about?" Williams pulled up a chair beside the hospital bed. "I guess that depends on who's doing the warning. What's your name?" "Ambassador Lyra of the Kathrani people." She struggled to sit up, wincing from her injuries. "I know what your species was told, that you were quarantined for being too dangerous. But I have come to ask the dangerous ones for help, because the civilized ones have abandoned us." Over the next several hours, Lyra painted a picture that filled the room with horror. Her home world was dying, its son being slowly murdered by the Vexen Empire's stellar harvesting machines. 2 million Kathrani had less than 12 months before their world became uninhabitable. "We went to the Coalition Emergency Council," she explained, tears streaming down her alien features. "We begged them for evacuation ships, for temporary shelter on other worlds, for anything. Do you know what they told us?" Williams waited, dreading the answer. "They said our species had served its purpose as galactic peacekeepers, but that we were no longer evolutionarily viable. They suggested we consider voluntary population reduction to make the problem more manageable." Lyra's voice broke on the last words. "They want us to choose which million of our people should die, so the other million might have a chance at refugee status." The general felt sick. She had seen humanity's capacity for both cruelty and compassion, but this cold calculation from supposedly advanced civilizations was beyond anything she had imagined. "Why come to us?" Williams asked. "We're quarantined. We have no ships that can reach other galaxies, no influence with the Coalition." Lyra met her eyes with surprising strength. "Because you are the only species that was judged too compassionate to be trusted with galactic citizenship." "Compassionate?" "They called us violent and aggressive." "Yes, violent in defense of others. Aggressive when protecting the innocent. The Coalition fears these traits because they disrupt the careful calculations that keep their society stable." Lyra leaned forward urgently. "I have studied your species during my journey here. You fight wars to stop genocides. You risk your lives for strangers. You refuse to accept that some deaths are acceptable losses." Within hours, news of Lyra's plea had reached President Robert Clark in Washington. The emergency cabinet meeting lasted through the night, voices raised in heated debate, that could be heard through the soundproof doors. Secretary of Defense Michael Rodriguez paced the room like a caged animal. This could be our chance to prove the Coalition wrong about us. Show them we're more than the monsters they think we are. Or it could be a trap, countered Secretary of State Lisa Chun. Send our entire fleet on a suicide mission across 2 galaxies while Earth sits defenseless. President Clark listened to every argument, every fear, every hope. Finally, he stood and walked to the window overlooking the White House lawn where his grandchildren had played just that morning. 50 years ago, they locked us away because they said we were too dangerous to join civilized society. He said quietly, now one of their own comes asking us to do what civilization won't, to risk everything for strangers we've never met, for people who never spoke up when we were condemned. He turned back to face the room. That's exactly the kind of dangerous thing humans do, and I'm proud of it. The decision was unanimous. Operation Sanctuary would launch within the month. Admiral Michael Brooks stood in the shipyard orbiting Earth, watching engineers swarm over humanity's hastily assembled rescue fleet. What they were attempting had never been done before. No human ship had ever traveled beyond the solar system, let alone cross 2 entire galaxies. The technology didn't exist, the fuel requirements were impossible, and they had less than 8 months to save 2 million lives. Tell me again how this is supposed to work, he said to Chief Engineer Lisa Parker, who was elbow-deep in quantum drive components that still smoked from the manufacturing process. Lisa wiped grease from her hands and grinned. Honestly, we're making it up as we go along. These quantum drives are based on theories we found in Ambassador Lyra's ship computers. We've never tested them beyond our solar system. The fleet itself was a patchwork of military vessels, cargo haulers, and passenger liners. Every ship humanity could spare had been retrofitted with experimental drives, reinforced hulls, and enough supplies for a journey that might take months. Captain David Reynolds walked the deck of his destroyer, the Defiance, running his hands along hull plating that had been welded on just days before. "Sir, are you sure about this?" his first officer asked nervously. "The computer models show a 60% chance of complete mission failure." David laughed grimly. "Son, the computer models also said humans would never leave Earth again. Sometimes you just have to prove the computer's wrong." The breakthrough had come from an unexpected source. Ambassador Lyra, still recovering from her crash landing, had provided access to Kathrani navigation data and star charts. More importantly, she had given them something the Coalition possessed, but humanity lacked: the locations of quantum transit points that could cut the journey time from years to months. These pathways were mapped by ancient civilizations, she explained to the assembled fleet commanders. The Coalition uses them for rapid transit, but they are heavily guarded. You'll be detected the moment you enter Andromeda galaxy space. General Patricia Williams studied the tactical displays, showing Vexen Empire positions. "How many ships are we talking about?" "The Vexen Third Fleet numbers over 800 vessels," Lyra said quietly. "Each one is larger and more advanced than anything in your fleet." A heavy silence fell over the briefing room. Captain Jennifer Walsh of the transport ship New Hope finally spoke up. 800 against 47. "I've seen worse odds." "When?" Admiral Brooks asked. "Never, but there's always a first time." The real genius of the plan came from Lieutenant Colonel Mark Davis, a Marine engineer who had spent his career finding ways to make impossible things work. "We're not trying to win a war," he explained to the assembled crews. "We're running a rescue operation. Get in, grab the civilians, get out." The Vexens want to harvest that star, which means they need the planet intact until the last possible moment. The human fleet's advantages were few, but crucial. They were smaller, more maneuverable, and completely unexpected. The Vexens had no reason to anticipate resistance from a quarantined species that supposedly couldn't leave its own solar system. More importantly, humans fought differently than any other species the galaxy had encountered. While other civilizations relied on overwhelming firepower and technological superiority, humans specialized in improvisation, sacrifice, and refusing to accept defeat even when logic demanded it. "The plan is simple," Admiral Brooks announced to the fleet. "We punch through the Vexen perimeter, establish evacuation zones on Kethros Prime, and hold the line long enough to get every civilian off that planet. Questions. Captain Reynolds raised his hand. What if the Vexens send reinforcements? Then we deal with reinforcements. What if our quantum drives fail in enemy territory? Then we fix them under fire. What if they have weapons we can't counter? Brooks smiled grimly. Then we ram them. Any other questions? The night before departure, the fleet crews gathered for what many assumed would be their last meal on Earth. There were no speeches, no grand ceremonies. Just ordinary people preparing to cross the universe to save strangers who had never asked for their help. Dr. William Hayes, now serving as the fleet's chief medical officer, sat with Ambassador Lyra in the observation lounge of the command ship. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "We could find you a safe place on Earth. You don't have to watch your homeworld die." Lyra shook her head. "My people are facing extinction because they believe civilization would protect them. If there is to be hope, it must come from those the civilized galaxy called monsters." The quantum drives powered up with sound like thunder. Space itself seemed to bend and twist as the human fleet prepared to break through the barrier that had imprisoned them for 50 years. In the distance, Earth hung like a blue jewel, perhaps the last sight of home many of them would ever see. Admiral Brooks gave the order that would either doom humanity or prove their worth to the galaxy. All ships, engage quantum drives. Operation Sanctuary is go. The barrier shattered like glass as 47 human ships disappeared into the void, racing toward a war they couldn't win to save people they'd never met. The human fleet emerged from quantum transit into chaos. Kethro's prime hung before them like a dying ember, its surface already showing the brown scars of a world losing its battle against cold. Around the planet, Vexen dreadnoughts moved in precise formation, their massive hulls bristling with weapons that could crack moons. Admiral Michael Brooks watched the tactical display with growing dread. Intelligence had been wrong. This wasn't 800 ships. The Vexen Third Fleet had grown to over 1,200 vessels, each one dwarfing the largest human cruiser. "Sir, we're being hailed," his communications officer reported. "The Vexen commander wants to speak with you." The alien face that appeared on screen was all sharp angles and cold eyes. "I am War Commander Thex of the Vexen Third Fleet. You will identify yourselves and explain your presence in restricted space." Brooks straightened his uniform. "Admiral Michael Brooks of the Human Rescue Fleet. We're here to evacuate the Kathrani population." Thex's laugh was like grinding metal. "Humans? The quarantined species? This is impossible. Your ships lack the capability for intergalactic travel." "Funny thing about humans," Brooks replied calmly. "We specialize in impossible." The transmission cut to static as Vexen fighter squadrons launched from the dreadnoughts like angry hornets. Captain David Reynolds watched them come on his destroyer sensors and felt his stomach drop. "Tactical, how many fighters are we looking at?" "Over 3,000. Sir, they'll be in weapons range in 4 minutes." The odds were so bad they were almost funny. 47 human ships against the largest military force the Vexen Empire had ever assembled. Any sane commander would have retreated immediately. But humans, as the galaxy had noted, weren't always sane. "All ships, break formation and scatter," Admiral Brooks ordered. "Remember, we're not here to win a war. We're here to buy time. Every minute we keep them busy is another minute for the evacuation ships to work." The first wave of Vexen fighters hit Captain Jennifer Walsh's transport ship, New Hope, like a hurricane. Her shields flared and died under the assault, but she kept flying straight toward the planet's surface where desperate Kathrani families were waiting. Hull breach on decks 3 and 4. Her engineer called out as explosions rocked the ship. "We're venting atmosphere." "Seal it with whatever you can find," Jennifer replied, wrestling with controls that were sparking and failing. "We've got room for 8,000 refugees, and I'm not leaving until we're full." Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Mark Davis was leading the most audacious part of the operation. His team of marine engineers had retrofitted cargo pods with stealth generators and launched them directly at the Vexen command ship. If they could disable the fleet's central coordination, it might give the evacuation ships precious extra time. 60 seconds to impact. His pilot reported as anti-aircraft fire lit up around them. "Sir, they know we're coming. This is suicide." Mark checked his equipment one final time. Son, suicide is when you die for nothing. This is just really, really dangerous. The human fleet fought like nothing the Vexans had ever encountered. Instead of maintaining formation and trading fire at long range, they flew directly into the enemy formation, using their smaller size to dart between the massive dreadnoughts. Captain Reynolds brought his destroyer so close to a Vexan battleship that their hulls were almost touching. "Sir, we can't possibly win like this," his tactical officer protested as enemy fire pounded their shields. "We're not trying to win," Reynolds replied, targeting the battleship's weapon ports. "We're trying to be so annoying they can't ignore us." Down on Kethro's prime surface, the evacuation was a desperate race against time. Dr. William Hayes worked frantically to organize refugee processing, while Vexan orbital bombardments shook the ground around them. Families arrived with nothing but the clothes on their backs, clutching children who stared up at the battle raging in their sky. "Doctor, we've got a problem," one of the evacuation coordinators called out. "The transport ships are taking too much damage. We're losing them faster than we can load them." Hayes looked up at the burning sky, where human ships were being picked off one by the overwhelming Vexan force. They had managed to evacuate nearly 500,000 Kathrani, but at this rate, they would run out of ships long before they saved everyone. That's when Admiral Brooks made the decision that would define humanity's reputation for the next 1,000 years. He opened a channel to every human ship in the fleet. "All vessels, this is Admiral Brooks. We came here to save lives, and we're not leaving anyone behind. All combat ships, prepare for ramming speed. We're going to punch a hole in their fleet big enough for the transports to escape." "Sir," his first officer said quietly, "that's a suicide run." Brooks smiled grimly as he watched another human cruiser explode under Vexan fire. Sometimes the only way to save everyone else is to make sure the enemy remembers you forever. The human combat fleet turned as one toward the Vexan command formation, their engines screaming as they accelerated to ramming speed. What happened next would be remembered across the galaxy as either the greatest act of heroism or the most magnificent act of madness in recorded history. The human fleet's suicide charge caught the Vexan commanders completely off guard. Admiral Michael Brooks watched his tactical display as 18 human warships accelerated directly toward the enemy's heaviest dreadnoughts, their hulls glowing from engine overload. The Vexans had studied galactic warfare for millennia, but no civilization had ever deliberately rammed capital ships as an opening move. "All power to forward shields," Brooks ordered as his flagship Horizon screamed toward the Vexan command vessel. "If we're going to knock on their door, let's make sure they hear us." The collision between the two ships lit up space like a newborn star. Both vessels crumpled and twisted, their hulls peeling away in massive chunks of superheated metal. But the explosion created exactly what Brooks had planned for, a gap in the Vexan formation large enough for the evacuation transports to slip through. Captain Jennifer Walsh pushed her battered transport New Hope through the breach, her hull so damaged that atmosphere was venting from a dozen different holes. Behind her, 6 more human transports followed, their cargo bays packed with Kathrani refugees who pressed against the windows, watching their homeworld shrink behind them. Medical bay to bridge, Dr. William Hayes called over the intercom. "We've got wounded from the ramming attack, but most of the crew survived. The blast knocked out our main engines, though." Jennifer checked her instruments and felt her heart sink. They were running on backup power and emergency thrusters. At this rate, they'd never make it to Quantum Transit Point before the Vexan reinforcements arrived. But the human sacrifice had done more than create an escape route. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Davis and his Marine team had managed to board the Vexan command ship during the chaos of the collision. While the alien crew dealt with catastrophic hull damage, Davis and his engineers planted explosives throughout the ship's central computer core. 30 seconds to detonation. He radioed to the remaining human ships. This should scramble their fleet coordination for at least an hour. Davis didn't make it off the ship before it exploded, but his sacrifice bought the evacuation fleet the time they desperately needed. Without central coordination, the Vexan ships began firing on each other, unable to distinguish friend from foe in confusion. The final tally was devastating. Of the 47 ships that had left Earth, only 18 limped home. Over 3,000 human crew members had died in the battle. But packed into surviving transports were 1.8 million Kathrani refugees, nearly the entire population of their dying world. Captain David Reynolds, whose destroyer had somehow survived the battle despite being shot to pieces, helped coordinate the refugee settlement on New Terra, a human colony world on the edge of civilized space. The Kathrani, with their gentle nature and diplomatic skills, integrated quickly into human society. Ambassador Lyra worked tirelessly to help her people adapt, but she also served another crucial purpose. Every conversation, every interview, every report she filed was transmitted across the galaxy through quantum communication networks. The story of humanity's sacrifice spread like wildfire through civilizations that had written off the quarantined species as irredeemably violent. They knew they would probably die, Lyra told the Galactic Coalition Emergency Assembly 6 months later. Their own military projections showed a less than 20% survival rate. But when I asked them why they chose to help us, Admiral Brooks said something I will never forget. The assembly hall, filled with representatives from over 400 species, fell completely silent. He said that being human meant refusing to let good people die alone, even if those people had never spoken up for you, even if saving them cost you everything. The political earthquake that followed lasted for years. Species after species began questioning the Coalition's decision to quarantine humanity. The Kethrali weren't the only civilization facing extinction. There were dozens of others threatened by the Vexan Empire, by natural disasters, by resource depletion. And in every case, the Coalition had made cold calculations about cost versus benefit, about strategic value versus expenditure. President Robert Clark was in the Rose Garden playing with his grandchildren when the call came through. The Coalition's formal invitation to join galactic civilization arrived exactly 51 years, 3 months, and 12 days after the quarantine had begun. Mr. President, the Coalition's Supreme Chancellor said over the quantum communication link, we would like to formally apologize for our previous assessment of humanity and extend an invitation for full membership in galactic civilization. Clark set down the soccer ball he'd been kicking with his grandson and walked to the communication console. That's very kind of you, Chancellor. But I have to ask, what changed your mind about us being too dangerous? There was a long pause before the Chancellor replied. We have concluded that the galaxy needs protectors who are willing to make dangerous choices, who will risk everything for strangers, who refuse to accept that some lives are more valuable than others. Clark smiled as he watched his grandchildren playing on a lawn that had once been surrounded by an invisible prison. Chancellor, we've been making dangerous choices for 50 years. We're not about to stop now. The quarantine barrier finally dissolved, and Earth's sky opened to the stars once more. But humanity had already proven that no barrier could contain their greatest strength, the stubborn refusal to let evil win without a fight.